any good loan officer is asking these questions anyhow. So, what good is a loan officer if they're not getting to know their client? So, if your goal is to eventually have the house paid off, what is the point of going back to 30 years? You got to present this option of changing the amortization.
Okay, before we get into it any further, I want to say welcome to Beyond the Paycheck. I'm Paula Christine. So Mark has already started this story. So I seen something on Facebook that popped up that said if you maybe could get seller concessions. So how it started was a $400,000 house. Said you offered them $280,000, they accepted it. You kept the $20,000 because you didn't have to use it for your mortgage, but you locked in at a certain interest rate. Or the other option was to pay or offer $400,000 and ask for $20,000 and seller's concessions, and it was showing you how you use that money to pay or to buy a lower interest rate and how much money that could save. I won't throw out the numbers because we don't know if they were accurate or not, but it got me thinking. So immediately I texted Mark a copy of that post and said, we need to talk about this because it sounds pretty cool if it really works out that way.
Yeah. So I put together like a realistic scenario for metropolitan Detroit, right? A common request of buyers from sellers as far as like a percentage of the purchase price to be paid towards their closing cost is 3%. Anything more than 3% of the purchase price, one, you have to put a larger down payment down because lending guidelines restrict the maximum seller contribution if you're just putting the minimum down, right? So either A, you got to be purchasing a pretty expensive house, putting the bare minimum down to get that amount of money in concessions, or B, you're putting more money down, which gives you expanded, lending guidelines for seller contributions, right? So in our scenario that I worked up, I'll share my screen in a second, I did a $300,000 purchase price and 3% in seller concessions because that's realistic. So 3% of $300,000 is $9,000. So what's the highest and best use of that $9,000?
Okay.
Well, you could do three things with it. You can take it as a reduction of the purchase price, and now your purchase price is $291, and all your financing is based off of $291 as the purchase price.
Mm-hmm.
Two, you could use it towards your closing costs and prepaid expenses and come to closing with that amount less than what you would have had to come to closing with had there been no seller paid closing costs or no seller contribution. Or you can use that $9,000 and apply it to purchase a lower interest rate. Those are really the three ways to do it. You cannot use any of that money to apply it towards your down payment and make your down payment larger. Seller contributions are not allowed to be used towards any portion of the borrower's down payment, only their closing costs and prepaid expenses. Prepaid expenses are things like setting up your escrow account and for taxes and insurance, paying the first year's homeowner's insurance. All that's allowed to be covered by seller contributions, but never, ever, 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 never, never, ever, ever the down payment
that the
borrower is required to make.
I don't think that's what it was saying. I think it was saying
No. I'm just explaining things.
Okay.
Oh, no. Okay. I realize that.
Okay.
So here, take a step back. How do you get the seller to agree to give you 3% of the purchase price towards your closing costs, right? The goal of the seller is to maximize their profit, I would assume, right?
I would assume the same thing.
Yeah. So either A, you have a really, really good real estate agent and it was negotiated all the way from the beginning when you made your very first offer and it was always in your offer and it was negotiated at the time the offer was accepted. Or B, maybe you had a home inspection and you discovered some deferred maintenance and now you're going to go back to the seller and ask for those concessions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the two most common ways that these things get added.
Okay.
So let me share my screen because I think what you're going to find is that it's not a ton of money in the end. But as with everything, there are opportunity costs. So if you don't use it towards and reduce the purchase price, then you're paying a higher purchase price. So what is the downfall of paying $300 versus $291? Well, in Michigan, when you purchase a home, you have to tell the city or township where you bought your home that you're the new owner. They're going to base their tax assessment off of what you paid. So maybe your taxes are a little bit higher if the reported sales price is $300,000 versus $291, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's an opportunity cost. So let me show you this. This is just a crude spreadsheet that I put together this morning. So line number 4 on our spreadsheet, but the first line of anything meaningful is a straight up, I'm purchasing a $300,000 house. I'm putting 10% down. Here's my principal and interest payment, and this is my estimated cash to close. So this was with no seller costs paid or no seller contributions at all.
Okay.
Line number 5, or the second line down, is reducing the purchase price. So you reduce the purchase price from $300 to $291. You're still making the 10% down payment. Now your payment drops from $1,752 to $1,698. That's $54 a month.
That's not a huge amount.
You're still coming to closing with close to what you were coming to closing at $300, because you use the 3% as a reduction of the price and not to cover your costs or buy down your rate.
Okay.
So you're coming to closing with a little bit less money because the purchase price is lower, but it's pretty close to what you would be bringing to closing if the purchase price was the original $300,000.
Okay.
Line number 6 or 3 on our spreadsheet is using it to reduce the interest rate and buying the interest rate down. So the standard rule of thumb is for every point that you pay in we call it a discount fee, your interest rate will be lowered 0.25%. So what's a point? A point is 1% of your loan amount.
So if you have a $300,000 mortgage, 1% is $3,000. So
correct.
So to lower, that's only a quarter. So if you wanted to lower it a whole percentage, it would cost you, in
So
this scenario, $12,000.
Yeah, if you had 3%, correct. If you had 3% in seller paid closing costs, you could lower your interest rate 0.75% from what the market rate is at that time.
Okay.
So I forgot to put this in there. Maybe I should type this in here, but
don't worry about it. Just say it.
Today market interest rate for 30-year fix is 6 3/4. So in our scenario where we're using it to buy down the interest rate, you're going from 6 3/4 to 6.
Okay, so my payment at 6 3/4 was $1,752, and my payment at 6% is
$1,619,
which is a savings of
$132 a month.
Well, that doesn't seem like
And you're still coming to closing with the original around $36,000. Now, if you use that money to reduce your cash to close and apply it to your costs and prepaids, you still have the $1,752 payment. The purchase price is still $300,000, but now you're coming to closing with $27,000 versus $36,000. So the real question is coming to closing with $9,000 less worth $132 more a month?
Did you figure out what their break-even point was?
68 months.
68 months.
Yep.
Well, I don't know. I'd have to really think about this.
Right. It's not earth-shattering numbers where it's
at
a
all,
very,
like
very
cut
and dry decision, right? It's not that
No.
It's not that easy of a decision. But depending on how you got the seller concessions, whether or not you know there's deferred maintenance, that stuff still needs to get done to the house. So you're probably better off applying it to your costs and prepaids and coming to cash with less money because you're going to have to do some work to the house. Plus, as you know, as a homeowner, again, in the past year, there's a lot of crap that you need to buy for this house that you probably haven't even thought of yet.
Yeah, we know that because, you've been with me 100%. Along the way, and there was more than $9,000 worth of crap.
In reality, I am always in favor, especially when you have interest rates in the sixes, which still is historically low, even though we've spoiled a generation of home buyers with low interest rates from 2019 to 2022. 6.75, anything in the sixes is still very historically low. I don't think it's a good idea to spend that money to buy down the interest rate. I would take the higher payment, pocket the $9,000, and put that to use in either another way or apply it to your new house to do the things you want to do.
That's why you don't believe things you see on Facebook.
Right. Right. Exactly.
Okay, so that makes sense. I mean, when you really sit down and look at the numbers, I know if that was put in front of me, I would have cut the $9,000.
Yeah, as most people would.
Yeah, that's
Now, if interest rates are 10, 11, 12%, and the difference in payment is
a lot more.
then, maybe you buy down the rate.
Well, that just helps me even just understand the whole thing about buying down your interest rate using points.
But a couple of other things about points is one, there is a tax deductibility feature to paying points in the year that you pay them. But if you're not itemizing your expenses on your personal tax return, there's no tax benefit because that would be an itemized expense. If you're just taking the standard deduction because you don't have enough expenses to exceed the standard deduction, there's really no benefit, no tax deductibility benefit.
Right. Okay, so let me just make sure that I understand this correctly. So every time you would buy down a rate, you're paying for every 1% of the mortgage balance, you're getting only 0.25%.
In rate, yes.
In rate. So even on that $300,000, even if you wanted to go from 6.25 to, or 6.75 to 5.75, you'd have to put down $12,000.
That's a $12,000 fee.
And then it would take you, what do you think?
Well, I mean, in that scenario, it would be a little bit different, right? Because the payment
would be different. The amount you would save would be different.
Yeah, so if you go from 6.75 to 5.75, that's $170 a month.
Okay.
Versus $132 at 6.
Yeah, but 170 divided into 12,000 is it's probably more than 68 months.
70 months, almost 71 months.
70 months.
Right. So,
yeah, I still don't think I would have done it. I think I would have kept the 12,000 because you don't know what the expenses are going to be when you move into that house. And I mean,
and we live in a 4-season state, and what happens if your furnace goes out or your air
I think it doesn't matter what
state.
State, every state, has issues.
Yeah.
Could be your air conditioning, could be
could be an appliance.
Yeah. Well, I know I put in a water heater, cement. I mean, I can make a list of all the things that I've added to this house. And it doesn't necessarily have to be even outside work or whatever. It could just be using it for paint or new carpet or whatever. I mean, you have all those, unless you're fortunate to move into a house that's your exact colors and the exact flooring that you want and the exact appliances. And
if you build a house, new construction, you pretty much get that.
Yeah. Well, that has, I guess, but that's not in this conversation.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, I looked at it and the way that the Facebook post was, it made it, I was like, wow, that's a huge savings, but it really isn't.
No. That, like most things on social media, was meant for clicks.
Yeah, but I wanted to understand it. Like,
yeah,
if it was true, I mean, that would be something that people should know about, but 100%. It isn't true. It isn't
100%. True. 100%. And here's, so if you are, as a home buyer, if you are concerned with payment and rate, like both Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac allow for what's called a interest rate buy down, where and that's one other thing that now that I'm thinking about it, I should have freaking put on my spreadsheet. But there's an interest rate buy down that is allowed. and it's in 1% increments. So let's say you wanted to go from 6.75 to 5.75. If negotiated, the seller is allowed to pay for the buy down from 6.75 to 5.75. However, it is only for the first year of the mortgage, and then it goes back up to 6.75. But you can do either.
By the way, we're both shaking our head like, I don't know if that makes any sense.
You can either do a 1-1 buy down where it's 1%, below market for the first year. You can do a 2-1 buy down where it's 2% below market for the first year, 1% below market for the second year, and then in year 3 of the mortgage, it's at the market rate of 6.75.
Yeah. I'd have to really see the numbers.
But
to
how
see
those programs work is this. One, the buyer is never allowed to pay for that. It has to come from the seller per guidelines. But what you're doing, what the seller is doing, is paying that difference in interest, that 1% difference in interest, up front.
For the 1 year.
Either 1 or 2 years, depending on what's negotiated. But yeah.
So, without having to do math, is that really a huge savings? I wouldn't think so.
Well, again, it depends, right? If you're going to ask the seller to do that versus give you the money towards your closing costs and prepaids, probably not, because you're saving that $170, like we had said, but you're foregoing that $9,000.
Okay, so what's going through my head right now, what I think is it doesn't make, I don't know a scenario where either one of the things we talked about makes sense. For me, and probably for most people, we believe interest rates are going to go down anyway. So,
right, and that's
will they go down?
Like if you buy down the interest rate, you got to stick it out for those 60 months, 70 months. Because if you refinance, you lost all the benefit, or whatever's left of the benefit of having the lower rate.
Right. So just thinking through this myself is I think that it doesn't make sense. I know we're not going to see rates of 2 and 3 again. I mean, it would be nice, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime in the future. So it kind of just makes sense to take the rate as it is today and, wait it out until it goes, keep the rate as it is today, take the cash.
Yeah.
And then wait until interest rates go down and refinance.
Yeah. Yep.
So when you do refinance, do you have to pay all the closing costs again?
Yeah, for the most part.
Well, that kind of sucks.
The one thing that is reduced, and I can only speak for the title companies that I use, but most title companies will reduce their settlement fee on refinances versus purchases. So you could probably save a couple $100 there, maybe. And 2, there may or may not need an appraisal needed. So if there's no appraisal needed, that's $500-$600 savings.
Still not a ton. Just thinking what my closing costs were, it's still not a ton.
Closing costs on a mortgage these days, when you factor in appraisal, credit, title, recording fees, lender fees, about $4,000. So if you can save
$170 a month on a $300,000 mortgage.
Yeah, if you do, yeah. If you do that and you extrapolate that out, what's your break even, you can do that. But when it comes to refinancing, people are hesitant to roll in the costs and the new escrow account because it's adding to their mortgage, right? They feel like, well, if I'm adding to my monthly mortgage, am I really making any progress on it? Or I'm adding to my mortgage balance. Am I really making any progress? Where it's really a cash flow conversation, not hey, I'm borrowing more on my house.
Right. If you're going to be adding to it and even though you're lowering your interest rate, you got to look at how much that's really going to save you in the long
Yeah,
run.
and the other thing is people are also don't like the idea of going back to 30-year financing. If they've been making paying on their mortgage for 6, 7 years, but there's an opportunity to refinance, but they don't want to go back to 30 years, a mortgage lender, or at least all the ones that I know of, are able to set up a new mortgage based off of any amortization you would like.
Oh, so
So
you
again,
could
like
you could do that for lower your interest rate and just go for a 23-year mortgage?
yeah, right,
Oh, that's interesting to know.
yeah,
Yeah, that would make sense to me. Because I got to refinance eventually when the rates go down.
yeah,
Because I think when was my rate 7, so I'm waiting
even
for 6 before I'll even consider it.
yeah, yep.
Hmm. Interesting. Do most people do a 30-year mortgage or do they?
Most people do a 30-year mortgage. Um, but those are some of the concerns that they have, right? I'm adding money to my mortgage balance and I'm going back to 30 years.
Yeah.
But some people get it and they're like, for me, it's all about cash flow. I don't care about going back to 30 years. It's all about cash flow.
Yeah, to me, it's like it'd be so nice to have this thing paid off.
Right. I mean, there was a point in time when rates were dropping where people were going literally from a 30-year fix to a 15-year fix, and their payment was going up like $100 a month.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess depending on when. Well, it's nice to know that you don't have to do the 30 because when I refinance, I don't really want to add on more time. I just want to lower the payment.
Yeah. You just tell them, well, any good loan officer is asking these questions anyhow.
Okay.
So, what good is a loan officer if they're not getting to know their client? So, if your goal is to eventually have the house paid off, what is the point of going back to 30 years? You got to present this option of changing the amortization.
Let's talk about that for a second, paying your house off. Do you know, I used to hear, and I don't know if it's true, I never did the math, but if you paid one extra payment a year, you would pay your house off. And
It's like 4 years and 7 months sooner.
so it's only like 20, instead of 30 years, it'd be like 25 years in a few
Yeah.
months.
Yeah, I think that's what the amortization works out to be.
So you'd almost have to make 2 or 3 extra payments a year to pay it off, and half the time.
I mean, some people are just hate debt, just have a real problem with debt, so they just aggressively pay it and aggressively pay it and aggressively. I mean, I talk to people that have made, every month they make like 4 payments every month.
Wow. Wouldn't that be nice?
They're just debt adverse. I don't
So
like it.
the reason that I'd like to pay it off, especially before I retire, so that I just know that I don't have to pay that, even though you still have taxes and insurance to pay, even after, the mortgage is paid off. Or just having that freedom of knowing that I don't have to make a house payment. It's just the maintenance of the house is basically all you would need. And what was I going with that thought? So that's the reason why I would pay it off. But what I am going to like seeing for me is when we talked about itemized deductions is that being a single person, I'll be able to itemize, which will be higher than my standard deduction because of having the mortgage.
Yeah.
So I get a tax benefit from from having the mortgage.
That's right.
So when I think that through, then I think, do I really want to pay it off in 10 years or do I, just ride it out? I don't know. It's hard to say, but it's all a planning question.
It's just hard to predict. It's hard to predict what your income is going to be later on in life to know whether or not.
It's not hard to predict. You can do proper planning, financial planning.
Okay, I gotcha. Right. But I think people, maybe this is just a generalization and I'm going to look like a fool saying this, but I would think that most people think that when they retire, their lifestyle has to change dramatically to compensate for the reduction of income, and now I'm going to passive income versus wage earner salary, even though maybe some of them will pick up a part-time job or pursue a hobby that might make them some money. I just think that a lot of people think that you got to really change your lifestyle when you retire, because you don't have even, I mean, while you're working, I suppose you still have the mindset that, I can still make more money. I can still increase my salary, my sales, my income. When you retire, unless you're willing to go back to work, I would think you got a set number, and that's your number.
Well, the typical rule of thumb is when you were planning for your retirement to plan for about 70 to 80% of your current income. So when I work with clients, we plan for 100%. So when you go into retirement, you have the exact same income that you had prior to retirement. And when I say that, we're working off your net income. So if you're bringing home, $5,000 a month, then we plan to have $6,000 a month, because what in your lifestyle do you want to take out today when you go into retirement? I think you could add some. I mean, you're a golfer. Do you think you're going to take that away, or were you going to golf more?
More.
Okay. So sometimes people spend more in retirement than they do pre-retirement, especially with hobbies.
They got more time on their hands.
Yeah. So you got to plan for that.
Money tends to burn a hole in people's pockets.
Yes. You have to plan for all of that. So you want to build that financial plan that includes being able to do all the things. And that's a nice bonus, having that mortgage paid off, so that the part that was going towards principal and interest is now going into your pocket for added expenses. And then you got to factor in healthcare. I mean, this is a conversation going in a totally different direction. The cost of healthcare, because now that you're not employed, then you have to cover that cost yourself.
Right on.
So a lot of things change. And one thing that does not change when you go into retirement is your expenses really don't go down.
That's a bummer. I was hoping you were going to say they go down.
Well, they can if you don't plan properly. You'll be forced to make that decision.
Right.
Who wants to make that decision? Just plan better.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
Garage sales. That's the answer.
Well, there's a lot of things you need to do today to make sure that when you get out there, that you have all the money you need.
Yeah. Without a doubt.
Without a doubt. And the younger you start, the better off you are.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
On that
note. This has been a lovely, lovely conversation. I'm not wrapping it up on your behalf. I'm just telling you that I have to go.
I think I just depressed Mark. So, on that note, Mark, how can somebody get a hold of you if they have any questions about what we talked about?
Yeah, so I'm here in metropolitan Detroit. The best way to get a hold of me is by phone, 248-379-6749. I'm sure my web address and stuff will be attached to this, so you can find me there as well. But I'm here in Metro Detroit, and talking about debt seems to be my favorite conversation.
Well, thank you, Mark. As always, I appreciate you. Yeah. As always, I appreciate you. So thank you very much. If anybody would like to reach out to me, they can find me at paulachristine.com. Okay. Talk to you later, Mark.
All right. Bye.